If you got big dreams and bad genes, you are in the right place. These shirts are available at barbellapparel.com. Get your free hoodie right now. Head over to barbellapparel.com. Now, I'm making this video for two reasons. One, because it cuts to the core of sportsmanship and competition, something that's very important to me, and it's something that we all have to engage in. The second reason I'm making this video is because it involves one of my favorite activities, which is the chainsaw dismemberment of sacred cows. I despise idolatry in all of its forms. It's one of the things that like all human beings are really good at doing, myself included, and it's really hard not to do it. And everyone generally agrees it's something that should be fought against, unless it's their sacred cow. No, when I said all the stupid people should be on an island, I didn't mean me. Now, the big example of anti-competitiveness and unchecked idolatry in strength sports is Bill Kazmaier, and I've talked about him before. I mean, people love him, and I absolutely get it. He was the last American strongman with an edge. I mean, I love to root for my countrymen, but over the last 20 years, American strongmen have come in two flavors: nerds and angry nerds. Yeah, I'm talking to you, 900-pound deadlifters who write poetry about how underestimated you are. Kaz was dominant. In his day, he boasted 315 sheet curls, 900-pound squats and deadlifts, a 660 bench press. He was an absolute phenom. And in addition to being dominant, he was an ultimate showman. His competitive demeanor, his aggressiveness, his self-confidence, it made him a heel. Somebody that you want to root against, but it becomes hard to eventually because he's so damn good. And people also love this simple motivational message of believe, conceive, achieve, which is his slogan that harkens back to his fundamental belief that self-belief is a driving factor in his success. But when you have a 330-pound albino gorilla, literal strongest man in the world, who's hopped up on D-ball, cocaine, and self-belief, the results can be terrifying. Bench pressing great and fellow wrestler Ted Arcidi had a few things to say about Kazmaier.
So they'd be doing crank calls at night and shit like that. And him and his manager would do stupid stuff, just trying to get my head out of it so I wouldn't go for the record. I just had to block it. So I thought that was kind of bullshit of them lowering themselves to play games like that.
And the Tom McGee Man of Iron documentary didn't make him look any better.
They know who I am.
I don't know
on TV, they know who I am.
Oh, big boy.
Yeah, you know what the world's strongest man competition is.
There's also ample film footage of him playing dirty, of him intimidating judges.
You made a big mistake, Webster. A real big one.
Even in his interviews with Big Laws and Josh Bryant, you will hear him go on about his own greatness, disparage other competitors, and there was, up until very recently, evidence of him harassing young female powerlifters on Instagram. Now, Kazmaier was the epitome of a poisonous competitive mindset, but he's not alone. Many of the people that we look at as greats in the history of sport also have maladaptive traits that defy our basic understanding of good sportsmanship. So we have to start by identifying what and who are toxic champions and why the fuck do we care. To start off, we have to differentiate. All high achievements absolutely require extra sacrifice, and the highest achievements arguably require the most. This isn't a piece about people foregoing time with their wife and kids, or doing too much to win, or making minor health sacrifices, or not taking a vacation or break. This is about specifically dysfunctional behavior, a backwards, toxic, poisonous relationship with winning and losing that leads to antisocial behavior. Poor sportsmanship is generally understood to be when somebody's actions bleed outside of the rules and norms of the sport in a way that creates consequences within the environment of the sport, but also potentially outside of the sport. And it's not hard to see that this behavior is often a clear reflection of the dysfunction the individual has in their own lives, rather than something that is isolated to the playing field. The most notable signs of this are people who have a violent, aggressive temper, people that fly off the handle when things don't go their way, people who have dysfunctional personal relationships, very often strained relationships with spouses, kids, family, friends, people who are very impulsive, and also who have a self-centeredness that gives them kind of an entitlement to break the rules. It's all about me and winning rather than the team, the other competitors, or God help me, the spirit of the sport. Now, on one end of the spectrum, you have people who are absolute menaces. You have the Bill Romanowskis, the Suarezes and Tysons, and yes, the Kazmaiers. You have people who are aggressive, who would play violent and dirty to get an edge, but also because they just kind of wanted to. You might like the finger-breaking, ear-biting, barrel-throwing when it's on your team, but you have to remember the golden rule. Not the do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but the real golden rule. Whatever you do unto others, they will do unto you. Condoning or benefiting from this type of behavior just guarantees it's going to happen more often, and it's going to be something that you're going to have to contend with. Just ask Bill Romanowski's teammate, who he punched in the face during practice, fracturing his orbital bone and ending his entire football career. Then on the other hand, you have the Michael Jordans, the Tiger Woods, the enlightened man's toxic champion. Rather than the bloodthirst that makes operating in civilized society a real chore, ego and self-centeredness is really more at the center of these individuals' personality. They're closer to the affectation of what you would think of as a high-performing CEO, stockbroker, or lawyer. And it's typically associated with achievement, and it's looked at a little more fondly than the other violent menace to society type of toxic champion, but those performances still come at a human cost. It's a lot easier for us to embrace this cost though, because we associate it with arenas in life where we want people to be obsessive. After all, you want a cutthroat medical school that's going to make sure that doctors are hyper competitive, because when you're going under the knife, you want that individual staying up late to brush up on their technique. You want them to prioritize their craft and by proxy you over dinner with the wife and kids. So the thing about the grinders and hustlers, the people whose 80-hour work weeks have helped build the infrastructure of society, is that we absolutely benefit from their work, but it's at the cost of their personal relationships, their mental health, and it might actually make their performance more volatile and unpredictable, and their success more short-lived than if they didn't do that. And it's also not obvious that the trade-off is needed for them to reach their full potential. Studies in psychology tell us that athletes rank higher on tests that look for traits of the Dark Triad. And the more toxic the athlete, the higher their scores tend to be. Now, the Dark Triad tests for 3 personality traits that includes Machiavellianism, Narcissism, Psychopathy, and every now and then there's a buy 3, get 1 free deal going on where they throw in Sadism to make it the Dark Tetrad. I guess because dark square isn't scary. Narcissism is what starts the whole thing off. It's the I deserve to be on top. This is the motivation for wanting to achieve in the first place. It's self-centered egoism that isn't content being overlooked or underestimated. Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods exhibit these qualities the most. Mike's "I took that personally" responses from the Last Dance documentary became a meme because they were so abundant and ridiculous.
It became personal with me, and it became personal with me. They made it personal.
Every rote business decision and every banal greeting was interpreted by him as being some malicious affront to his value, his worth, and his supremacy. So he would constantly concoct stories about not being good enough and needing to show them. And Tiger Woods golf coach Hank Haney described his view of other people as such: anyone who was brought into his world was lucky and would be playing by his rules. Now, narcissism is one of the most vulnerable traits on this list because it's based on the needs of a fragile ego. Narcissists might be self-centered, but they're still tethered to other people because it is the validation of other people that they ultimately seek. Now, Machiavellianism is the I'll do whatever it takes to get on top. That's the cunningness, the cheating, the backstabbing, going to extremes, breaking rules. Kazmaier's harassing of Ted Arcidi before he was going for his bench record, and Kaz's intimidation of the judges at World's Strongest Man were Machiavellian to the core, as are instances of deflated footballs, state-sponsored doping rings. Anytime the rules of conduct or the spirit of the sport is violated in favor of winning, we can find some rationalization inside of our copy of Machiavelli's The Prince.
If you are a good warrior, able to coerce other people, able to impose your will on a universe that is both indifferent to you and indifferent to any moral structure you might create, then and only then are you a man worth taking seriously.
Now, most people hear "do whatever it takes" and they think of it in kind of a positive light because the world is not overflowing with motivation or opportunity, and very rarely do the two come together. So sometimes we give reverence to people who will use whatever resources and intelligence they have to create opportunities out of thin air, even if it involves blurring or even crossing lines. But the real problems occur when Machiavellianism is paired with the rest of the dark traits. So we have I want to be on top, I'll do whatever it takes. Psychopathy is the I don't care how it affects you. And that's what takes the desire to be on top and the drive to do whatever it takes to especially disturbing places. One of the last governors that might reel in a very strong desire to win at all costs would be empathy for others, a basic human feeling of not wanting to cause too much harm to other people, to the institution you're participating in, or to people that you love. However, psychopaths see other people as objects, and the most notorious toxic winners have this trait in spades. Tiger Woods showed plenty of signs of this from his treatment of others. From Ryan Holiday's "Stillness is the Key." There were, for those who were looking, signs of sickness, the throwing clubs after a bad hole, the lack of concern for the fans, this occasionally imperiled, the way he'd broken up with his longtime high school girlfriend by packing her suitcase and sending it to her parents' hotel room with a letter, the way he responded when Steve Scott saved him from accidentally scratching in their epic head-to-head match, not even thanking him, not even acknowledging the incredible sportsmanship of it, treating it like the weakness of inferior prey, the way he'd left his college golf team to go pro without even saying goodbye to his teammates, the way after he finished eating with his family or friends he'd simply get up and leave without saying a word, the way he could just cut people out of his life. This is a very long way of saying Tiger Woods was a selfish asshole. Now, in more aggressive sports, Machiavellian psychopaths will have no problem using violence to their benefit, such as Bill Romanowski, who was famous for his violent outbursts.
And I'm down there just trying to rip that ball out of his hands. All I could get was a finger. Just whatever it was, I just snapped it.
Some of his highlight reel includes spitting in the faces of opponents, breaking fingers, kicking heads, and as mentioned earlier, breaking the eye socket of a teammate and ending his career. But even psychopaths aren't by definition driven to violence. They're just simply defined by the fact that they don't really care. It's their lack of concern. So that brings us to the fourth trait in the tetrad, which describes that desire to cause harm. Sadism is the "I want you to lose and I want you to hurt in the process."
Winning was fun. Beating someone's even better.
So we're going beyond the drive to be on the top, the need for validation. We're going beyond the fear of looking like a failure. Now we're going to the actual place where joy is taken from the failure of others, from submitting and hurting other people. The most egregious sadists give themselves away by their lack of concern over whether or not their tactics even really benefit them, because much of the time it doesn't. It's true dysfunction that chooses that antisocial violent behavior even when it's to their own detriment. Like, consider Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield, something I saw live in my living room when I was 10 and scarred me permanently. You already had dark traits being shown by Holyfield, as he had no problem getting in close and repeatedly headbutting Tyson, something that many would call a deliberate dirty tactic. However, Tyson said, "Hold my beer," and then proceeded to chew off the top third of Evander Holyfield's ear. And no, I did not mean for that to rhyme. From Tyson's perspective, that was nothing but a surefire way to end the fight, get disqualified, potentially lose your ability to fight in the future, get fines, penalties. There were nothing but consequences. There was no advantage to be had. Yet Tyson's outburst at the moment was driven by a desire to hurt Holyfield back. More egregious than that is soccer player Suarez, who was also famous for biting. With Tyson, you kind of get it. You're exchanging punches. It's literally a fight. You're frustrated, you're in pain, you're exhausted. The ear is just right there. It takes a special type of fucking crazy to get your teeth in the vicinity of another player's flesh in the middle of a goddamn soccer game. It makes you wonder about the real story of the soccer players that survived the plane crash and resorted to cannibalism. You guys were only stranded for 12 hours. Did you have to eat, Jorge?
You ever find yourself confused by the complexity of programming? I know I struggled like crazy in my early strongman career. There was just too much advice, and every decision I made felt like a guess. As soon as I hit a snag in any program, I would have no idea what to do, so I would inevitably bail. It took me years of training and coaching to figure out how to predictably increase muscle and strength, both in myself and others. And those lessons took me to my own showings in World's Strongest Man, America's Strongest Man, and the Arnold in the 231-pound weight class. This is why we made BASESTRENGTHAI, to give clear, direct, and personalized instruction right in the middle of your workout in real time. Base Strength AI features 3 programs: Block, 70s Powerlifter, and Bull Mastiff, each one inspired by the work ethic and programming of the biggest and strongest bodybuilders, powerlifters, and strongmen throughout history. These templates originated in my book Base Strength, and they can be ran as is, but with Base Strength AI, weight and volume are prescribed to you on your specific feedback, and that's personalization that even an online coach can't replicate. This gives you the absolute certainty that every rep is meaningful, that every block of training is getting you closer to your goals. It's my programming, but it's your program. Get the heart of old school training with the intelligence of a coach right in your back pocket. Head now to basestrength.com.
Now, all of these traits can be innate predispositions, qualities that were built into you, that you were going to have regardless of what environment you were brought to be in, but they become especially nasty when they've become weaponized in the gain of function petri dish of socialized dysfunction. You have overbearing parents, you have cutthroat sports teams, you can even have social circles that specifically hate being associated with losing, and they can impose unrealistic standards and teach and reinforce the norm that winning is the goal and it should be sought at all costs. All these scenarios create social conditions that can instill these traits in somebody who may not have innately had them and make them exponentially worse in somebody who did. Again, we go back to Tiger Woods, who could be the patron saint of dysfunctional athletics. Tiger was taught golf by his father Earl, who was a former Green Beret, and in Tiger's own words, he raised him to be a cold-blooded assassin. The boot camp that his dad put him through from the age of 1 involved cheating when they played, supposedly to keep Tiger humble, and taunting him with racial slurs to help his focus under stress, of course. His dad also established another layer of psychological warfare by creating a safe word that would get him to stop at any moment and restore a normal father-son relationship. That word was enough. But of course you couldn't say the E word because it was a sign of weakness, that you weren't good enough or strong enough, that you would forego the validation of victory in order to make the pain go away right now. It was the most obvious way to tell other people you are as low as we thought you were. And to keep that train going, he had to permanently and consciously block out his need for a normal father-son relationship. As Ryan Holiday said, are we surprised then that this talented boy would go on to win so much, but that those wins didn't make him happy? He was imperturbable on the golf course and utterly miserable inside. Bonus points for me not screwing up imperturbable on the first take. Now, some athletic teams mirror this no-holds-bar approach to competition, rationalizing that a cold and unforgiving system that expects everything and gives nothing back is the surest way to guarantee the best product. Make everybody fight each other to the death, and you're going to make sure that everybody does exactly everything in their power to be as good as possible. The Bulgarian team's a great example of this, as the approach to success was absolutely loony. Instead of playing into the hyper-complicated percentage-based fuckery that was Soviet programming back in the day, where you were constantly rolling back and forth between different variables to get the most adaptation while still making the work manageable and recoverable, the Bulgarians said, fuck fatigue. The body adapts, and if these guys want it bad enough, they will too. The Bulgarian routine involved hitting a 1-rep max in 3 lifts, 3 times a day, 6 days per week. What, did they have something to do on Sunday? Psh, fucking losers. The workouts were legendary. The sheer tonnage of super maximal failed lifts would make your jaw drop, and it, as predicted, chewed people up. It also had a huge psychological downside. As John Bros often talked about, athletes would experience the dark times, some 1.5 to 2 year period of time where your hormones would be absolutely fucked. And it took that long for your brain and your endocrine system to adapt to where squatting to a max every day was just like walking up a flight of stairs. Now, these stories are often used as motivational kindling to show us that we can, in fact, endure more than we think. And the beauty is that we can, but only right up until we can't. Like, that system broke people, mentally, physically. The approach works because when you have an abundance of people vying for a spot on the team, you have plenty of eggs that you can break. And it might be in your best interest to turn the stress all the way up, break a few of them, so that the greats actually end up marginally better than they would have been otherwise, and that's how a small country like Bulgaria managed to secure so many Olympic lifting medals. But it's important to note that this is also unsustainable. They were Olympic lifters, they lived in a compound, had their meals planned, they were handled by coaches, they were massaged daily, given a state-sponsored drug regimen. This is not the life of an average lifter, even professional lifters. In addition to that, many of them had this as their only way out of poverty. And that incentive, knowing that every 1 rep max, every successful lift, is taking you closer to you and your family having a good life, that will make just about anybody go to crazy lengths to sacrifice their body. But it's also not reproducible outside of that extreme context. Now in powerlifting, Westside became famous for their dominance in equipped lifting, which many credited to the training system. The secret sauce of Westside, I believe, was that cutthroat training environment, which was as close to an Eastern European Olympic training camp as anything that had ever existed in powerlifting. It was completely unique to have a place where not only were people selected for their talent, you had to be invited, but you were expected to show up and fight like hell or get the hell out. The competitiveness of Westside was legendary. It was a mix of radical personality types, social dysfunction, unreasonable expectations, and the need for ultimate approval. It was specifically driven by Louis, who I have heard from multiple people described specifically as a master manipulator, like the king of withholding parents. He was reportedly an expert at finding everybody's insecurity and using it against them, especially if it could pit them against another competitor to get him a record. This social dynamic was so important that, like I said, Louis had to modify the program down the line because he didn't have the social dynamic of the crazy, hyper-aggressive, unhinged, dysfunctional personality types hopped up on drugs, wanting to kill each other for a record like he did in the earlier days. So the reason that speed work never took off, according to Dave Tate, it's because when they did speed work, they were trying to fucking kill each other, and it takes a special amount of narcissism and sadism to use banded speed box squats as a way to submit your opponent. Now, it should be obvious to functioning adults, and even some non-functioning adults, that this type of environment comes at a human cost. Even if it has good results on paper, there's a question to if it's sustainable or if it's worth the sacrifice that has to be made. For Westside, the training environment was extremely volatile. It was notorious for the drama, the fallouts, people leaving pissed off and vowing never to come back. Some of the lifters, like crazy girlfriends, would go through this cycle multiple times. And many really, really talented athletes ended up leaving on bad terms and seeking counsel elsewhere. So it begs a question of camaraderie and teamwork. A great example is the American Olympic swim team, which dominated the relay race for 13 straight years, up until the year 2000, where despite having the fastest swimmers, they continued to lose. Now, as reported by Jason Lisak, one of the last races in Athens, Greece in 2004 was a 4x100 meter relay. And he reported the camaraderie that existed among those guys as being specifically different than other relay teams he had swam on. According to him, all the other three had attended the University of Texas and had that in common. They pumped each other up, and I fit in well with them. You could feel it. Those guys wanted the race for all the right reasons, for themselves, for the team, for our country. We went out and dominated, breaking the world record by 3 seconds. Now, this is the preferred storytelling in Hollywood when it comes to sports, where people who are incomplete by themselves, dysfunctional, egocentric, end up putting aside differences, learning to work together, and in the process create an outcome, a whole that is bigger than the sum of their parts. The grand lesson is positivity, working together, and doing it for all the right reasons. Now, ironically, as much as I love those movies, one of my favorite movies is Whiplash, which depicts the cost of a brutal, hyper-competitive music program where a completely sadistic and unhinged instructor is willing to be violent, abusive, and threatening in order to squeeze the absolute best performances out of his musicians, even if it involves pitting them directly against each other to get the desired result. The main character, played by Miles Teller, suffers a type of breakdown. He sacrifices his relationship with his dad, with his girlfriend. He drums until his fingers bleed, which is inspiring and disturbing all at the same time. Later in the movie, he's talking to the abusive instructor, played by J.K. Simmons, and he asked about the methods that drove one student to suicide.
Cries himself to sleep that night, but the next morning, what does he do? He practices with one goal in mind: never to be laughed at again. And a year later, he goes back to the Reno, and he steps up on that stage and he plays the best motherfucking solo the world has ever heard. So imagine if Jones had just said, well, that's okay, Charlie. That was all right. Good job. And Charlie thinks to himself, well, shit, I did do a pretty good job. End of story. No bird. That to me is an absolute tragedy.
Now, the movie isn't purely a cautionary tale, as it ends with a barn-burning performance that makes your nipples hard and your hair stand on end, and it was a direct byproduct of playing into all of those dark traits. So the film is more of a juxtaposition. It's showing a side-by-side of the beauty of ultimate artistic expression that only comes by this really ugly self-sacrifice that most people just aren't okay doing. And it leaves a big question mark to the viewer as to whether or not the juice is actually worth the squeeze. Now, making Whiplash look optimistic by comparison is The Iron Claw, which features the famous wrestling family in which 4 of the 5 sons died as a result of their father's cold and obsessive approach to achieving victory. In a rare case where the real story is actually more horrifying than the movie portrayal, the film left out one of the brothers because having yet another death in the movie would just be too grim for audiences. And for those who have seen it, this is not a feel-good movie. There's one commonality that's shared between all of these social environments: stakes. Any reasonable moral human being is going to find themselves more willing to break rules as the stakes rise to a sufficient level. Like if you have somebody in poverty who has an opportunity to make enough money to set up their great-grandkids, they're probably not going to be so concerned with cheating as a big moral question. You can always make the argument, that's just a game, but this is my life. Or if I don't do it, plenty of other people are going to do it, so why not me? But if you extend the stakes even higher, let's say you're being coerced by the mob to throw a fight, or else someone you care about is going to get hurt. At that point, cheating suddenly doesn't seem like that big of a moral concern. But what of the person who becomes angry and erratic from a bad poker hand? What about the person that uses psychological tactics on 8-year-olds? What about the person who cheats on a game of tic-tac-toe? To these people, the competition is always representative of the highest possible stakes. Doesn't matter if it's the Super Bowl or categories, the outcome of every single interaction is some direct commentary on your competence, on your worth. So if the entire construct of your identity is at stake every single time, why would you value above that sportsmanship, the spirit of athletics, or the societal-wide benefits that they provide? Well, if you're a narcissistic Machiavellian psychopath, you wouldn't. Now, it's no surprise that there might be a correlation with better performances with those who are the most unhinged in becoming the best they can be at those games, but it's also no surprise that the cost of that compulsive behavior, emotional volatility, and pissing off every person involved in the sport might rack up to be higher than what you actually gain.
So I wasn't invited. I sat by the phone, didn't ring. I cried. I went to the mailbox. The letter with invite wasn't there. Bullshit. I didn't cry. Kaz doesn't cry. I didn't really care. I didn't really care. I didn't really care.
These dark traits are often rationalized by many as a necessary means of obtaining excellence, like you have to transcend normal societal boundaries and do what others won't. You gotta risk it for the biscuit. But those winners, the ones who the crowd stopped rooting for, the ones who teams don't want to sign despite their talent, the ones who maintain relationships because of their status, not the content of their character, those are the toxic winners that stand out because they are so different from the ones who don't display those features. LeBron James doesn't have the stigma that Jordan did as being a toxic player, yet many people will argue to the death that he is the better player. Legendary great players known for their sportsmanship include guys like Steph Curry or Tim Duncan, Peyton Manning, Cal Ripken. Consider every UFC fight you've seen. It's a furnace of testosterone that's lit in the midst of a ring of blood and violence. It rewards violence with the highest possible stakes, live in front of a large bloodthirsty audience. And how many of the greats have you seen shake hands with their opponent before the fight, hug them after the fight, and speak nothing but respect when talking about the fight? For every heel in the form of a Conor McGregor, a Chael Sonnen, a Ronda Rousey, you have class acts like George St. Pierre or Damian Maia, who are known by everybody for being pure sportsmen, not hostile, not malicious, and still achieving the highest status in the sport. Now you might say, so what? Who cares if it's better for winning? Strategy is no excuse for being a piece of shit. You might be onto something. But let's assume that actually getting fewer people to be assholes on the field is our primary concern. I think we can talk more narcissists out of narcissistic behavior if we can appeal to their own selfish interests. The biggest case against toxic mindset isn't strategy. I wouldn't even say it's the morality. To appeal to the nature of the competitive narcissist, it's not enough to say this isn't just a good strategy. You have to specifically point to every aspect of the individual's life that is tainted by this behavior to demonstrate that the individual is in fact worse off by engaging in this behavior.
I think the reason why I started thinking I needed help is because I realized that I did not have an alternative to manipulating. The only way that I understood how to interact with people was through manipulation.
Tiger Woods' traumatic upbringing ruined his ability to see other people as human, to engage with them in relationships the way normal people can, and it led to a sex addiction, and that almost ruined his career. I mean, what would it do to the relationships of professional football players if it was common knowledge that you actually perform better when you're in a healthy relationship by a supportive partner free of any abuse or codependency? The more extreme expression of dark traits lead to outright illegal activity that don't just hurt performance, they get you expelled from the league, racked up with numerous fines. They have your legacy tainted and probably have you thrown in jail. How close was Romanowski to being the next O.J. Simpson, Aaron Hernandez, or Oscar Pistorius? So when you take the toxic mindset, the shitty winner, and all of the insecurities, the need for external validation, and you take the acquired sense of entitlement to be shitty in search of those things, it absolutely bleeds into the rest of their life, and it makes every single thing worse for it. And to anyone whose life is in shambles, but you're hanging on to the next big total, the next big win, know that you would be better if you were the type of person whose life wasn't in shambles. You'd have more connections, more support, more resources, and your ability to perform would be higher. I'm going to smash that record and show them is not a worthwhile sentiment. You aren't showing anybody because nobody's fucking keeping score. No eulogy ever involved the dude's last meet total. Strength and performance is fleeting, but the core of who you are is here to stay. And I'll say it again, the only people that are okay as champions are the people that would have been okay anyways. Now, some people see the expression of toxic champion mindset and they scoff at competitiveness. They see it as this ultimate slippery slope that just leads to this type of shit behavior no matter what, and therefore we should deconstruct competitive environments. We shouldn't make it a requirement for doing well in school or work. In fact, the entire capitalist structure is competitive and evil, and we should be done with it. And I have to make this clear, the inevitable shitty winners, the people that exploit dark traits, dysfunctional behavior, and use it against people in these type of game settings, they're not the reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater because, spoiler alert, those people act shitty in every situation. Competition is not optional for individuals, let alone society as a whole. Life is a process of continuously getting better at acquiring the things you want through increased access to resources and improved strategy. Learning to crawl, learning to walk and talk, learning to communicate with peers, basic socialization, advancing in school, picking a career, developing expertise, advancing in that career. Till the day you die, everything is about growth. If you are not growing, you are dying, and that growth does not happen without competition. The games we play are simulations for the life equation that effort plus strategy plus time equals improvement, which is why youth sports is so important in the first place. They're not frivolous, they actively sharpen the saw. They teach us how to want something and to go about getting it. They teach us to plan and work and collaborate, but most importantly, they teach us to not fall to pieces when we don't fucking get it the first time. That is the real reason we put helmets on 8-year-olds and have them run into each other full speed. Not because it's really, really fun to watch, because lessons. But seriously, competition is baked into the DNA of all life for a developmental purpose. It's evident by animals who know how to play, who require it as part of their normal socialization. It's an instinct to them. Psychological studies show us what happened when kids are denied the competitive aspect of rough and tumble play. It affects our ability to properly interpret social cues, distinguish between playful aggression and real aggression. It impacts learning to control their aggressive impulses. It impacts our ability to develop empathy, develop the ability to read body language, develop problem solving, develop cognitive flexibility, and the big one for the totality of sport to exist in the first place, social bonding, which is hindered when you're the asshole that ruins it for everybody. Now, people also do more in competition. It's been shown over and over that somebody working solo to their absolute limit is not going to perform as well as they would when they have a pace setter or somebody else to work against. In fact, it's not even close. Your ability to do the things in your life that you love, that are important, and that have stakes are all better, are all going to be taken to higher heights in the face of competition. As the saying goes, you're the product of your 5 closest friends. Well, if your immediate environment doesn't have anybody to chase, anybody to set the pace for you, it turns out that your immediate future is pretty easy to predict. So it's important to say the lesson that leads to healthier outcomes isn't that competition is bad. It's actually the exact opposite. Competition is the most important thing. It's winning that actually isn't that important, because 100% of people that play the game and do so in good faith are going to end up better than when they started. And this is a self-evident truth to anybody who's pushed for youth athletics, who's worked in adult rec leagues, who has used sports and competition to help in rehabilitative circles. And it's evident to people who exist in this hobby as it consumes your time, attention, and drains your bank account. We are better for competition. We need it, but only if we do it well. So that's all I got for today, guys. Let me know what you think. Who is your favorite toxic competitor? Was watching Bill Romanowski maim people a secret guilty pleasure of yours? Or do you think that this type of behavior shouldn't be allowed in any sports league? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see ya.